Time to go on the record with WRAL News.
Thanks so much for joining us for On the Record. I'm Lena Tillett. We begin tonight with a photograph, 3 in fact, that represent innocence and joy and love. 5-year-old Khloe Fennell loved to dress up as a mermaid, as you see in this photograph here, and her smile, loved ones say, lit up a room. This month, we collectively grieve the loss of this child that was lost in an unthinkable way. She was shot and killed by a relative as her babysitter, also a teenager, tried to shield her from the gunfire. Khloe was laid to rest this week. Her alleged killer, whom we will not name, is in jail on murder charges. I interviewed the chief of police, Patrice, a week after the tragedy. In a wide-ranging interview, we talked about how she and other officers are processing Khloe's death, what's driving gun violence among young people, and how she's keeping morale up with staffing low.
It's hard. It's hard to process. I think for me, you know, my children are older, but I see my children in those children, right? I want to just make perfectly clear that I often think of how are my officers going to feel and what are they feeling? Because many of them have children that are the age and were the age or are the age of the children that were affected that day, right? And of little Khloe. And then it's how do I help them? And how do I help them process what they've seen? But it's tough. It really is. Because I have a 5-year-old niece. And so Saturday she had a swim meet. And I am watching her swim, and I broke down in tears, because how can I be so happy when there is a mother that is without her 5-year-old and a 15-year-old that is forever going to be changed. She's a hero, but she's forever going to be changed by what she has experienced. I feel a little guilty for being there in that moment with my 5-year-old niece doing so well, swimming, but knowing that there is a mom and a family that will be without their 5-year-old.
And then how do you ready yourself for the investigation that follows?
So you have to shift and say, okay, so now we have to go to work, because if we are not able to make that shift and be on our game, right, and make sure that we've got all of our I's dotted and the T's crossed, all of this is for nothing. And you want to make sure that you have everything you need to be able to facilitate a successful prosecution. And you want to be the voice for those that can't speak.
You know, the circumstances around Khloe's death are complicated. Yeah. The suspect, Brian Luster, that you just mentioned, is her mother's cousin, according to loved ones. Loved ones tell us that she was allowing him to live with her as he was getting himself together. And then this violence happened. So he was going into a home that he had been allowed to stay in. Do you know any intent at this point? Was he going there to hurt those children?
I don't. I don't know. I don't know anything other than kind of what I've just told you. I allow my investigators to focus on the arduous task at hand of piecing everything together to be able to create what happened that day and maybe what caused that to happen. And I will say that there are some things that just simply can never be explained. And I think that's where we all as human beings have a lot of trouble, you know, because we have to find a reason why in a lot of tragedies. And if we can't, or there is really no reason why, that makes it very hard for us to be able to find closure. So I don't. Right now I can tell you that they are still, even though an arrest has been made, the investigation still doesn't stop. It does not stop. In other cases that we've had, you still meet with the district attorney's office. District attorney's office will review the case, and they will look at it from a different lens, so from a prosecutorial lens. What other information do they need to be able to successfully prosecute?
I guess you mentioned, though, that you went there and the call was an overdose. So that meant that there was a call that came out of that house, and then you got there and it was chaos. I mean, does that tell you anything about maybe how things just progressed in such a tragic way?
It can change in a split second. It can change in a split second. I mean, a traffic accident can simply be a traffic accident, but even that can change in a split second when someone decides to make it more than just what it is.
Do you know, or can you tell us, I should say, where he got the weapon from?
I don't know. I honestly, when I say to you, I allow my detectives to do their work, I allow them to do their work. I receive debriefs as something breaks. So if something major happens in the case, then I will receive that information. But it's all a part of the investigation.
I think a lot of people in Durham right now are grappling with how something so horrific happened in their city. As the person charged with keeping folks in the Bull City safe, what do you tell them?
What I will say is you can never predict crime and victimization. You can never predict violent crime. If we could, then we wouldn't have any violent crime. We wouldn't have tragedy. Unfortunately, when you wake up in the morning, and this is a cycle of life, you don't know where you're going to be at the end of the day. And that's true for everyone. But what I can say is that, we work very closely with community partners in order to maybe help address the causes of violent crime. There are so many root causes and what lends someone to be more apt to commit violent crime than someone else, or more apt to commit a crime than someone else. And so we're very active in working with community stakeholders to hopefully prevent 1 or 2 or 3 more incidents.
Coming up, Chief Andrews addresses what's driving rising gun violence among teenagers. And she says it's not just gangs. Let's talk about some of the other crimes that we've seen in the city this year, because sadly, Khloe's case is not unique in that many young people have been either victims of shootings or have committed shootings themselves.
Yes.
Our data shows roughly a quarter of people shot in Durham this year alone have been under the age of 18. Why are so many young people getting shot?
There's a lot of access to firearms. And certainly this is not me speaking politically, but that's fact. Right? There's a lot of access to firearms. Our children are they're every day they're being bombarded with images of violence, or they play games that manifest violence, right? But really what's interesting is that, children, they are not born to be offenders, right? They are not born to commit offenses, and they're certainly not born to be victims of any crime whatsoever. But what I think happens is that somewhere along the line, our offenders who are juveniles, there's something that happens to them, whether they witness violence or they are victims of crime themselves, and that is never, ever addressed, right? Or simply they just don't have someone that tells them and shows them their worth. Our kids have a lot of weight on their shoulders You know, I've met children that are 15 and 16 years old that they are really living and making adult decisions. That's not fair. That's not fair. So there's just more to it than just what we see, right? There are a lot of root causes, and it's not and it's not going to be something that will fix overnight, or maybe in 2 years, in 3 years. I mean, you almost have to take children from the time that they are wrapped up in some sort of traumatic situation, right? Whether it's through witnessing it or surviving a traumatic situation. And you have to really surround them with services that will last them through their lives.
Because you are seeing the young people who are doing this, you can almost always pinpoint that there was something traumatic
Yes.
in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Is there a common theme in terms of what these kids might be doing, you know, before the crime? Are they involved with gangs? Is there some common theme among these young people?
I wish I could say yes. It would make it a lot easier for us to be able to at least isolate it and address it. I don't feel that there is a commonality, right? Again, it's about the choices that they're making, but oftentimes those choices, they may not have a choice in that, right? We see the world as in this is right and this is wrong. But if you choose something right and you could face worse repercussions for going the right direction, you're going to choose wrong because you don't want to be, you don't want to seek or have repercussions sought against you. I mean, it's just very hard for them. The peer pressure, what is love? How does it feel to be loved? How does it feel to know that you are more than what in this moment, what you are? You're born to be more than where you are. Your existence is grounded in greatness. I had a conversation with a 15-year-old several weeks ago that was in the back of a patrol car. And it was a tough conversation for me. And what I told him was, I said, you are not my child. I said, and there are many people out here that you don't know that love you. I said, you're not my child, but I love you like you were mine. And I said, you were born to be better than this. And it visibly affected him. And I remember once he got out of the patrol car, he looked at me, and it was probably one of the most incredible moments. And I don't know where he is now. That's tough. It was almost like he had never heard, I love you. Yeah.
Wow. And he didn't say anything, but it was the look.
It was the look.
You know, police work already is hard. I can see that on the faces of officers. But dealing with crimes toward children, what toll is that taking on your officers?
A tremendous toll. You know, officers will say, it's fine, we're fine, I'm good, I'm this, I'm that, right? Because we have been, we have almost been conditioned to push it down. Because guess what? There's another call coming out. So push it down, push it down. To the point where you can potentially become numb to what's happening. And so we have to work, and we, meaning at the police department, worked very hard to making sure, or at least creating an environment where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to come forward and say, I'm not okay. To provide those services. We have a great peer support group that went into immediate action last week. And when an officer says, or doesn't say, but watching their body language that they're not okay, it's, saying, you know what, we've got this. Go home, we're gonna check on you. Take a moment, take a beat, just go, it's not okay, you're not okay. I can see it. And them knowing that that's not the end of their career. It's not because you say you're not okay, it doesn't mean that you can never be a police officer anymore. It's quite the opposite. We want to make sure that you'll be able to be okay so you can continue to be a part of this profession.
It's okay to not be okay. Well, staffing shortages continue to plague the Durham Police Department. Why the chief says some officers are leaving. You have said that, about 20% of positions are open at DPD
Yes.
right now? Is that still the case?
So we are currently 122 vacancies, and that's out of 534 fully staffed. We have 122 vacancies.
That's a lot. Look, I've seen your posts on social media, posting videos. I've seen the billboards going up to say
great.
that you got some hiring bonuses.
Yes.
I've seen you have a cash incentive now
Yes.
for employees, for
Yes.
referrals. I mean, are any of those things making a difference?
Yes, so they are. But unfortunately, when we onboard a candidate, it takes a year because we run our own basic law enforcement training. And we train, our training is rigorous, right? It takes a year from the time that we bring them on through the academy into field training until the time that they can actually ride on their own. So when I say yes, it's making a difference, I'm seeing more candidates coming into the police department front doors and being seated for an academy class. And that's always a great thing. We know that we're not going to graduate 100%, but the more that we can get in, the more that we'll be able to graduate. And that's helpful. Officers are becoming more involved in recruiting, whether or not you're assigned to the recruiting team or not. The $5,000 incentive has been very helpful. Because officers are the biggest recruiters for the department. Our non-sworn staff, they were the biggest recruiters for the department. And so we want to recognize and reward that effort.
But in the interim, you're short-staffed.
We are short. But, officers realize that. We realize that. But we're committed to continuing to answer the call. We were sworn to serve and protect our community, and that's what we are going to do, and that's what we will continue to do.
How's morale, though?
You'll have to ask them. I mean, here's what I'll say to you, is that every year I personally go and meet with every one of my staff. So every single patrol officer, and we started at about January, and we do weekend meetings and meetings in between with our sworn and our non-sworn staff. I can tell you that's helped. Officer morale, I will tell you, our officers don't want to leave Durham. They love Durham, but they also have families, right? And there's also they're overworked, right? And they don't want to leave. But they're not leaving because they hate Durham or they don't want to be here. It's a life decision that they have to make. It's a survival decision.
Let's talk about one factor they may be considering in that decision, which is pay. We know at City Council, there were a lot of public comment. We heard from officers. And I guess the decision was to come up with a pay study.
Yes.
And evaluate how much officers should be paid more. how do you go back to your officers and say, well, let's just wait for this pay study to happen, and then we'll see, maybe you'll get an increase in salary? How does that land with your officers?
So most of them were watching. You know, they rarely ever watch a council meeting, but they were watching that night, and well, those series of council meetings. So what I know is happening is that the market study is being done. And, you know, there has been a commitment, because our manager recognizes, and council also recognizes, that, one, you have to be great stewards of the funds, of taxpayer dollars. And you can't throw money at a problem if you don't really have an end game, right? If you don't have a long-term plan. And in order to get there, there has to be the market study. It's hard. It's hard because officers, we want money now. We need this. We don't want to leave our agency. And ultimately, the message is that we will continue internally to look for incentives to keep you here. So whether it's our take-home car program, or, you know, doing more training. So officers have wanted more training and time off to be able to take that training. And so we've been able to do that. There are internal things and internal structures that we've put into place in order to make that news sting a little less.
Chief says it is incredibly difficult to communicate that with her officers and understand that there's so much she can't control, but that's just the reality of the situation. Look, our conversation covered a lot. To learn more about Khloe's case and Chief Andrews' thoughts on other issues WRAL has been reporting on in Durham. You can see the full interview right now in our story on WRAL.com. On WRAL.com, you will also find the incredibly moving service for Khloe Fennell, which happened on Friday. We are certainly all thinking of her family. Our hearts are with that family as they grieve. If you have something to say about tonight's discussion, you can find me on Facebook or email us at ontherecord@WRAL.com. Thanks for joining us.